Good morning. You're listening to BizNews Daybreak on Wednesday, the 4th of March, 2026. I'm Alec Hogg. We're here to cut through the noise and give you the clear, actionable business news you need before you get into your day today. Here's what you need to know to make the most of this Wednesday. Well, it was a wild ride on the markets yesterday, with the rand plunging from an opening of 16 rand and 8 cents to the US dollar to a low of 16.73 last night as Wall Street, panicked. But some calm was later restored by, guess who, Donald Trump, and the S&P and Nasdaq ended just 1% lower on the session, and our rand starts the day 20 cents better than its worst point at 16.53, a long way from where we started the day yesterday, but, better than it could have been. Here's the overnight news from our partners at Bloomberg.
There was more weakness in the U.S. equity market, although most of today's early losses were recovered after President Trump said the U.S. would provide insurance guarantees and naval escorts for oil tankers and other vessels traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. That said, there are no signs of de-escalation and the outlook remains precarious. Scott Cronert is head of global ETF research at Citi.
The market's going to react as they are to the immediate consequences of this, which is the oil price spike and the potential implications of that through the macroeconomic variables that come into play. The moment you get a confidence that there is a line of sight towards the end, then you can begin to discount out the other side. We're not there yet. That's what we're watching for every day.
That is Scott Cronert, global head of ETF research at Citi. At the same time today, we heard from Goldman Sachs Chairman David Solomon. He is actually surprised by the market's reaction. He called it benign. Solomon went on to say he thinks it will take weeks to understand more about the current situation. The Dow Industrial Average closed lower by 403 points after having been down 1,277 points at its worst level. President Trump said he ordered the attack on Iran because he thought Tehran was about to attack first. Trump also said Israel did not force his hand in initiating air assaults. Here is Trump speaking in the Oval Office.
Based on the way the negotiation was going, I think they were going to attack first, and I didn't want that to happen. So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. But Israel was ready and we were ready.
Trump said someone from within the Iranian regime might be the best choice to take power once the U.S.-Israeli military campaign is completed. But he said most of the people the U.S. had in mind are dead. President Trump also criticized Spain for denying the U.S. access to its military bases for the bombing campaign against Iran. Trump told Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent to cut off all trade ties with Spain. Now, the Spanish government responded by saying if the Trump administration wishes to review its trade relationship with Spain, it must do so while respecting the autonomy of private companies as well as international law and the bilateral agreements between the EU and the U.S. We got reaction from Ana Botín, the executive chair at Banco Santander. She downplayed the rift between the U.S. and Spain.
Spain and the United States have had amazing relationship forever, centuries, and I'm sure that's going to happen again very soon. So Santander, on the other side, we are a big investor in the United States. We see ourselves as a bridge between the United States and Latin America and Europe and the United States.
That is Ana Botín of Banco Santander speaking earlier to Bloomberg. Crude oil prices rose for a third straight session, and analysts are saying if higher energy prices are sustained for a period, inflationary pressures will begin to accelerate, and Fed rate cuts will likely be delayed. Now, money markets have priced in 45 basis points in total easing by the end of the year. For the Fed, the key question centers on the duration of elevated energy prices.
A big local story now. In a recent incident at a cattle farm and beverage facility in KwaZulu-Natal has sparked serious concerns about political overreach and abuse of power. A group of around 50 people, including members of parliament and armed police, arrived unannounced and demanded access to the premises, completely ignoring strict foot and mouth disease protocols. We caught up with Gerard Papenfuss to get the details on this forced entry and to hear his urgent message to business owners about standing their ground against such unauthorized inspections?
The Thirsti brand is one of the things, but they also have as a cattle farm there. So they've got various operations. On the 4th, 10 SUVs pitched up at the premises with approximately 50 people. They presented themselves to security. When they were asked, what are you doing here and who you are, they overran the pedestrian gate. They also forced open the vehicle gate. They did not comply to any security protocols. They simply invaded that premises. Security lost control of their premises. One of the farm managers, directors, told me that it felt like a farm invasion. Now, I saw footage of the way security was addressed, how management was addressed, the way these parliamentarians were dressed themselves, the way they talked to this business. It indicated absolute lack of self-respect, respect towards others. And then they started doing that so-called inspection. They invaded the company. South Africa's hugely struggling with the food and mouth situation. And as I said, this is a cattle farm. They ignored the protocols for food and mouth totally. One of the portions of the farm was closed down as a result of this inspection, but the labor inspectors didn't inspect that part. They were simply informed by members of parliament that you must close that area down. This is deeply concerning, and the point is, this is not the first time that this has happened, but this is the first time that it is actually been brought under our attention. So this is why I'm doing this, because this need to stop. These members of parliament have no business on the premises of any business. They have no right to access whatsoever. They must be refused to gain access. Now, when initially we refused access, the police in civilian clothes, carrying semi-automatic assault weapons, adopted a threatening stance towards security. So they opened the gate. They were threatened with arrest.
What can NIASA do for Normandine Farms, Thirsti, for the people who've been abused in this way, to ensure it doesn't happen again?
We wrote to Speaker of Parliament and to the chairman of the Portfolio Committee, and they need to deal with this. And let's see how they're going to deal with this. The second thing is, give this as much as possible airtime. A business need to understand when these guys arrive, what you need to do. But then one need to understand, what do you do if guys with semi-automatic assault weapons pitch up at your security and you threaten them with arrest? That's a tough position you find yourself in at that moment. Now, people said, well, then you open the gate. I said, no, you don't. And if that leads to arrest, well, then a business owner must do it. There's a point where you say, well, then arrest me, and then deal with that afterwards. You have a right. Nobody except a labor inspector is entitled to enter your premises. Now, if the Department of Home Affairs arrive and they say that's what they do, I believe the same arrangement applies. But that is structured, is disciplined, and then a certain number of people comes onto your premises and do an inspection. You can't stop that from happening, and I won't advise anybody to do that, because they have a right to do that. But not this mob pitching up at your premises. You keep your premises closed. They have no right to be on your premises, and these parliamentarians need to understand it. Their job is to go and do it there within the confines of that building in Cape Town, but not on the premises of business, and they need to be kept out.
You can get that full story by listening to the interview with Papenfuss on BizNews Radio. Incidentally, the chief executive of Normandine Farms, Rob Hoatzin, is one of the keynote speakers at next week's BizNews conference. There are still tickets available. We opened up an extra 50 yesterday. Go on to biznews.com and click on the image at the top of the page. As geopolitical tensions in the Middle East continue to simmer, investors must rapidly reassess regional risks. We caught up with top fund manager Cy Jacobs to get his read on the situation. Sai's pretty much number one in the country right now. His 361 funds having dominated together with Sean Pesh. And incidentally, again, Sai and Sean are both at the BizNews conference next week. They dominated the awards at the recent Raging Bull awards, which are kind of the Oscars in South Africa. But back to this fascinating clip. Jacobs explains why an immediate regime change in Iran remains unlikely and highlights the chilling reality of modern supersonic weaponry. But perhaps most surprisingly, he unpacks the astonishing resilience of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, which has soared despite the ongoing conflict. And he explains how Iran's recent aggression might actually be strengthening the Abraham Accords. Let's take a listen.
Just being around for a long time, it's impossible to call it. I mean, it could end in the next few days. Maybe maybe there's a negotiated settlement. What I am seeing is no regime change. I can't believe that it'd be that easy to change the regime, regardless of who's not there. And we saw when we saw Hezbollah being attacked and the total regime being removed, we can see they even re-entered the war alongside Iran as a proxy in the last few days. So it doesn't seem like it's very easy to create that kind of change. But you want to take the big threat away. I mean, technology was changing at a rate so fast that I think both the US and potentially Israel were scared of what could be manufactured. You've seen what drones can do now and how little they can be picked up, and supersonic missiles that are actually traveling at 6 to 7 times the speed of sound. So there's a lot of new technology which is exceptionally dangerous, and you can't allow a regime that has this type of view on the world to possess those types of weapons. So I really don't think there was a choice, whether you argue it was now or later or before. This has to be dealt with, and we're going to have to go through the pain. And while we're going through that pain, I think we just be a bit cautious in our investment stance.
And if you had investments in the Middle East, in particular the Gulf states, which now no longer appear to be as safe as they were, well, certainly they're not as safe as they were before, is that a red flag?
I think it's definitely a valuation adjustment. I think that is important. I mean, they were never really superly highly rated. Funny enough, the exchange that's done unbelievably well, and they did unbelievably well even yesterday, was actually the Tel Aviv exchange. If you follow the Tel Aviv 25 index, I think over 3 years it's up like 170% or dollars. And if you go back to the invasion in October the 7th, a couple of years ago, since then the market is close to the best performing market in the world, and continued to do well because it saw maybe the potential post this war for a better Middle East. And I think what definitely has happened, obviously, by Iran attacking some of their Arab neighbors, is this has potentially strengthened the Abraham Accords and strengthened the ability of Israel to work together, call it with their sensible Arab partners, in a greater future for the Middle East.
Good news from Southern Africa. BizNews partner DCC Hotel Group showcases world-class hospitality across the region. We spotlight more than 100 carefully selected lodges supporting tourism, local communities, and conservation. Here in Hermanus, whale watching and coastal charm await. Your home for the BizNews Conference 2026.
The view from inside Israel now. My colleague Chris Stein interviewed Colonel Sarit Zehavi. She's the founder of the Alma Research and Education Center, a recognized authority on Middle Eastern security, specializing in the Iranian proxies. Colonel Zehavi served in the Israeli Defense Forces Intelligence Corps for 15 years.
What do you make of the stance of Russia and China at the moment?
For now, it doesn't look like, and I talked about it in some of my interviews. I was asked whether it's going to be a global war, and I said that eventually I don't see neither China nor Russia sacrificing themselves for the Ayatollahs of Iran. Russia and China are interested in in the Russian and Chinese interest, and it's not an alliance that is based on ideology or based on, shared values. They don't share anything with the Islamic Republic other than money and interest. And that's why I don't think that they will go against the massive power that was brought to over here to the Middle East by the Americans just to protect a sinking ship, okay? This is what it is, the Islamic Republic. And second, I do believe that the fact that President Trump and even Benjamin Netanyahu had some kind of a level of dialogue with both China and Russia will assist in this into, moderating crises and making sure that they will not join in. I'm saying that very carefully. Again, I know that war is the kingdom of surprises, but I believe that it's not within their interest to protect them that way. It is within their interest to moderate, to see what they can do in trying to stop the operation in a way that they will survive, but not in a way of making this a global war.
Is there any chance of the US backing down?
I'm an expert to the Middle East. I am not sure I can predict what exactly will happen with the US. It seems like there is a lot of decisiveness to continue, at least for now. Yesterday, President Trump spoke about 4 weeks. Even for us, it's a long time. You need to understand that in Israel, there is no routine. It's a holiday now in Israel. We're not celebrating. Children are not going to school. Businesses are closed. We didn't choose that. We didn't want that. But it's either this or extinction. And that's why it was so important for us to go for that. I hope that the Americans will continue to be with us on that, because if they will not, and the Islamic Republic will survive this, it's an option, they will get back to those capabilities. It will take them maybe years, but they will invest a lot of money. By the way, a lot of money on the expense of their own people. They do not invest in infrastructures. They do not. The people in Tehran don't have enough water, don't have enough electricity. There is inflation. The economic situation is really, really bad in Iran, and yet the resources are all towards war, before the current war, before the US attacked Iran. And the investments were in the nuclear program, in the ballistic missiles program, and not in the benefit of their own people. So I hope that this time, everybody will work together to truly bring a change, because this will affect not only the Israelis, it will affect many people in the Middle East, the Iranians themselves, but also in other countries here that Iran took advantage of in order to build its capabilities against Israel, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and like the Houthis of Yemen.
And while most of the focus of the Iran war has been on markets, Trump, Israel, and of course Iran itself, the war promises to have a massive impact on the prosperous Gulf nations who are now directly in the crosshairs of Iranian retaliatory strikes. This is sparking intense diplomatic anxiety and causing massive disruptions for global travelers. To understand how these countries are reacting, we turn to Ahmed Al-Omran. He's the Financial Times' correspondent based in Saudi Arabia. He spoke to Mark Filipino, host of the FT News Briefing.
Many Gulf states call the U.S. their ally. They even host American military bases. And since Saturday, they've been the target of Iran's retaliatory strikes. Here to explain what this means for the region is the FT Saudi Arabia correspondent Ahmed Al-Omran. Hi, Ahmed.
Hi.
How are the Gulf states feeling about being targeted and brought into this?
It's a very difficult position for them to be in. Most of these Gulf states have opposed an American strike on Iran and have urged both sides, the Americans and the Iranians, to engage in diplomacy. Oman in particular has been playing this mediation role between the two sides, trying to avoid a military conflict. But here we are, since Saturday. It's been very intense, very jarring for this region to have the conflict playing out in the way that it has done so far.
And at the time we're speaking, the Gulf region has not retaliated against Iran's strikes. What could push them over the edge?
It depends on the escalation and what Iran is doing. So far, Iran has retaliated to the American strikes by targeting these Gulf countries, including, civilian targets in their cities, hotels, landmarks, and more recently, we've seen them target energy infrastructure, oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, the main gas, LNG production site in Qatar. So these countries have become very frustrated, and they expressed this frustration and anger with Iran over the last 2 days in statements warning that they condemn these strikes and being targeted, and they warn that they are considering all options when it comes to how to respond, but so far they have not retaliated directly.
Ahmed, what do we know about the hundreds of thousands of travelers who are currently stuck in the Gulf?
It caused a sense of panic and concern among a lot of, travelers, investors who also, do business in this region. We've seen many of them scramble to try to find a way out. Riyadh and Oman have emerged as the two main routes for which people have been using, mainly by driving in cars overland and then taking flights from there, since these are the two countries that have not closed their airspaces. All the other 4 Gulf countries, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE, have closed their airspaces either fully or partially over the last few days. And that has been a cause of major disruptions for travelers and for flights everywhere because, these places, especially Dubai and Doha, are major travel hubs connecting east to west. So the fact that these airports have been closed and their spaces closed has been a huge problem for many people as they either try to escape the region or just travel around the world, since this is a major hub for people moving around.
We got a treat to end off with, perspective and context on what's happening right now from a Wall Street veteran. John Rogers is a prominent American investor, philanthropist, and the founder, chairman, and co-CEO and co-investment officer of Ariel Investments. He's widely recognized not only for his success in value investing, but also as a trailblazer in the financial industry. Rogers founded Ariel Investments in 1983 in Chicago when he was just 24 years old, and the firm made history as the first African-American-owned mutual fund company in the United States. He's a big follower of Warren Buffett and Benjamin Graham, so a friend of this program, no doubt. He spoke to Carol Mazar and Tim Stenovec at the Bloomberg Business Week podcast.
We've had lots of ups and downs, 1987 crash, 08 and 09 financial crisis. But this is the first time we seem like we're making this crisis happen. We're making a conscious decision to make policy decisions, whether it's the tariffs or now whether it's the war. And that's causing all this drama and all this angst. And that's something that's unusual and different for us.
How do you trade that?
Well, I think on the one hand, you trade it is that we know that President Trump cares about the markets. He sees that as a scorecard. So the one positive thing you can pluck out is that eventually he figures out a way to adjust to get things back to a calm state eventually. But you just hope he doesn't go too far, one more time and stretch and do something that really he can't pull it back. America always goes to extremes, and things ultimately get back to normal. Warren Buffett says, our capitalist democracy is the best system ever invented. And so we'll ultimately put the right people in place, governments will shift and change, and people will be able to get to a place that I think will bring back a better life for folks from middle America. And I think that's really, really important. I think keeping interest rates reasonable, keeping inflation low is really, really important, creating the other tax policies that are fair and equitable. So I think we'll get there. It takes a while, but we'll be on our way back, and I think we're in that process now.
So you're optimistic?
I'm optimistic that we will create the wealth gap in our country will start to diminish over time. Well, what I worry about is that Iran does something that's extraordinarily painful for America or another part of the world. As they fight back and feel like they have to defend their honor, they'll just do something that will be we'll all have a hard time living with over the long run. So we all saw what happened when the World Trade Center, collapsed, and all the trauma and drama and extraordinary heartbreak from that situation. And you just hope that nothing like that happens again ever in the United States or in our friendly countries.
So much of the concentration of the market has been mega-cap tech names. I'm wondering if it's possible to outperform mega-cap tech or the S&P 500 by excluding those from a portfolio, by finding those value names.
Well, I think so. As I've been very public. I think the large cap growth stocks have gotten way, way, way too expensive. Everyone's fallen in love with that trade for quite a long time. But I've seen this happen time and time again in my 43 years at Ariel, but also saw it throughout history. The Nifty 50s during the 70s, the Nifty 50 stocks. You saw it during what happened in the go-go 20s. People just fall in love with the sector and think it's just going to go up and up forever. And the small stocks get neglected. They get misunderstood. They're not as well followed. And so opportunities gets created because everyone's falling in love with this hot, shiny dollar out there.
And you think that's happening right now?
I really, really do. Up until most recently. I mean, I've seen the Palantirs of the world and others have finally started to have some of their comeuppance. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of what happened during the turn of the century when the internet bubble finally burst. So you're starting to see some signs that the world is coming back to rationality and people are realizing some opportunities in their smaller names.
In turbulent times, always good to get perspective from cool heads. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Well, thank you for joining us for today's BizNews Daybreak. To stay ahead of the curve and read more from our expert contributors, make sure to visit biznews.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share it with your network. I'm Alec Hogg, wishing you a prosperous day. See you tomorrow.